Welcome to the Modern Mystery Quiltalong 2023.
This is a great way to usher in the new year, and we're so excited to share this with you.
So this is the first of 6 videos that we'll be doing that are part of your pattern purchase, and we hope will help you feel successful and learn some new things, but whether it's about design or a new technique. But we hope that these videos will be useful to you.
In this first one, we're going to talk a lot about choosing fabrics, because it's always tricky when there's a mystery. Everyone is working with their stash. This is a very stash-friendly quilt, and it helps to have ideas of what you can do. So we're going to dive in and explain some of them.
We're going to show you several different palettes and different types of fabrics that we think will be successful, because we want to give you the broadest range possible, but there are some limitations that you're going to need to consider when you're planning your palette. Go ahead.
So we're going to begin. Weeks will walk you through the first palette, which is the one that we'll be working with for as we do this and we post our progress. These are the fabrics you'll see us using, and they're all from our stash. And after she shows you this, we'll show you some others, because you may do something very, very different.
So the first thing you want to do, if you haven't already done it, is to download the Installment 1 that was part of the pattern purchase. And that will give you the overall quantities that you'll need for the first installment of the pattern. The pattern calls for a minimum of about, I think it's 26 fabrics. However, we're going for a much scrappier look. So we're using, I just kind of estimated around 80 or so fabrics, and we don't have equal amounts of all of the fabrics, and you don't need to either. So as you read each step of each installment, you'll be able to figure out whether you have enough for that particular unit. But Bill has written the pattern to use the language from assorted group 2 fabrics or something like that. So you'll be able to choose whether, if there's 6 blocks needed or 6 units needed, you can decide whether you want 3 of them to be one pair of fabrics or all 6 to be different, for example.
And the pattern has illustrations of all the sewing, and we're using the colors of our sample palette right here for the illustrations. Yours may vary, as you'll see in a moment. But in general, it is very fat quarter or quarter yard cut friendly.
Or even scrappy friendly.
Yeah, very scrappy friendly.
So the most important thing, I think, to explain about choosing your fabrics for this project is that you are not going to be making blue units or red units, or we're not going to be telling you exactly what colors to use. We're going to be asking you to divide your palette into 2 groups that have good contrast, and in which you would be comfortable if any of those fabrics ended up next to any of the other fabrics. So when, I've taught the Rediscovering Your Stash class, a lot of times people, if they're making a block from a, multicolored palette like this, want to put pretty fabrics together. But then when you do that, when you put the whole quilt together, you get kind of, I call them like puddles of color. You'll get, this is the blue and green block, and this is the red and orange block. And it doesn't disperse the color as evenly as you want, which can kind of create layout challenges for you down the road.
So in general, the whole pattern is written of using fabrics from group 1, which in our case will be this, and group 2, which in our case will be this set. So just to reiterate what Weeks is saying, if it's saying pick 3 fabrics from group 1, then you want to pick 3 generally different fabrics. You're not trying to make quote unquote pretty individual pieces. Just know that when they all go together, they're going to look great.
So the most important thing for you to get comfortable with, and this might be a little bit different than, because there are some people are used to making quilts that with 6 fabrics and they all match and they're all placed very carefully. This is going to be a very different approach, which is that you're going to intentionally put fabrics together in a unit or a block or whatever that don't necessarily, you wouldn't normally put together, because you're going to try to disperse the color over the entire group of units and blocks.
So we have the 2 groups. Group 1, in this case, it's darker. And we have group 2, which is distinctly lighter. So when we say you need 2 contrasting groups, if you look at this shot, it's very clear which belong to which.
And if you'll also notice that there are no large scale prints in ours. There are some smaller units in this quilt pattern. So if you have, for example, this is a beautiful K-facet collection fabric, but this is going to be, it's not the best use of the fabric to cut it up into little teeny tiny pieces, because you don't really see the fabric. And then the patterns that you will need to create, if it's a checkerboard or something like that, you won't be able to see it very clearly if you're using large scale prints, because a color in 1 2-inch square here is going to look very different from a color in 1 2-inch square here. So as much as we love these large scale prints, these are not ideal for this particular pattern.
We recommend sticking to small scale prints, medium scale prints. Tone on tones work wonderfully. Batiks are great.
As long as they're not too heavily modeled, that you're going to have, that they're basically a large scale print, that it's like light on one side and dark on the other side.
Some batiks you cut in one area and it looks green, the other looks purple.
Right, exactly.
That wouldn't work as well. But fabrics that, when from a distance are seen as predominantly one color, kind of work well.
Another thing that we took out of our palette that you don't have to take out of yours, but just because it's kind of an all or nothing sort of situation with white. So fabrics like this that have white in them are going to really, let me just give you an example here. They're going to stand out a lot more if there's big areas of white than if there are fabrics that don't have any white at all. So that white really jumps out. So if you're going to use fabrics with white in it, use a lot of them in both group 1 and group 2. So then there were others that we pulled out because they weren't definitively, there wasn't enough contrast between group 1 or group 2.
Or, this is a great example.
Got a lot of threads on it.
When you look at it, it could look a little bit almost like it belongs to this, but almost like it belongs to this. So if you think of having, in this case, light versus dark, if you look at this image on the screen right now, we have a scale showing light on one side and dark on the other. What we've done is we've really gotten rid of the in-between.
The middle
We've left kind of a gap, because this, it's a little ambiguous. It doesn't quite fit in here. It doesn't quite fit in here. So, these are this medium area these aren't light pastel by any means, but there's just a gap to make sure that you have a clear difference between these.
Absolutely. The other one that we took out was this fabric, which because it's just too saturated compared to the rest of the palette, and it would jump out too much.
And for those of you who aren't accustomed to saturation, quilters often just call it bright. So if something is far brighter or far dustier, it will stand out. It will either look dirty or it will be kind of screaming at you. So just try to make sure that works. And we talk about the 10-foot rule all the time. We say, assemble your palette, step back 10 feet and look at it And we actually like to leave it overnight and come back to it the
Yeah.
next day. And sometimes there's just one fabric that is standing out, that is drawing too much attention to itself, and just take it out. If it looks better without it, you've made a good decision. You have to go back and forth.
Now, one of the things that that we want you to do is to be able to have help and kind of community as you do this. So the Modern Quilt Studio Patterns and Facebook, Patterns and Fabric group on Facebook is a great place where you can share with others your palettes, and as we are able, we will weigh in occasionally. But I do want to say that the $25 pattern purchase includes the 6 videos and the 6 installments of the pattern. However, it does not include email support.
Sorry, we don't have the unlimited support.
We don't have a 24-hour. So I will not. Neither of us will be able to. People often like to send us their palettes and ask us to give them personal coaching on that, and what that is not included. We couldn't possibly do that. So
sorry.
So the Modern Quilt Studio Patterns and Fabrics page would be a great place to share your ideas with others. But I think we're going to give you enough examples that you'll be successful.
Yes, because the goal for this whole thing is for you all to be successful.
Yeah, but we can't do one-on-one through phone calls or email.
So as we go with each installment, there will be a short video like this that walks you through concepts that you need. Sometimes it might be a sewing technique. Sometimes it might be design discussion like this. And please, as Week said, you can post your progress. The only thing we implore you is to not post any images of your finished quilt before the official post date that is on the schedule.
It's fine to be posting your step 1 or something like
your
that.
progress along the way.
In the Modern Quilt Studio Patterns and Fabrics group, we just ask you to keep it within that group so people who may want to start it later aren't, they don't have it spoiled for them. So let's go on and show you another palette that will work. If you have a totally different stash and you want to use maybe some reproduction fabrics, or you want to kind of give a new life to more traditional fabrics that you might have in your stash.
If you're looking at this and saying like, oh, I'm not a jewel tone or a bright person, oh, this quilt's still wonderful for you.
And you can do this monochromatic as well. You could do this in dark greens and light greens, or if you have a big blue collection, you could. All that matters is this contrast between group one and group 2.
These could all be sky blue. These could all be navy blues.
Or this could be group 1, and then you could have a lighter pastel group that would also work.
So clear division. So I'm going to move. Oh, this is heavy.
Yes, it is heavy.
So I'm going to move this aside just a moment, and Weeks will bring out the next palette.
So this is a palette of more traditional fabrics. A lot of them are yarn dyes, and some of them are Civil War reproduction fabrics. Some of them are art fabrics, just from lines that had more brown in them. But you can see that we've got a really good group 1 and group 2 figured out here, and that there is a very clear balance in the value. So no matter what fabric you put where, it's going to be clearly in group 1, and the group 2 fabrics, there's no ambiguity as to which, and it helps you to not get confused as well.
So in our case, like the last palette, this is lights and darks, but remember, it doesn't have to be that way. These could be browns and these could be purples, as long as there's a clear difference. And once again, we like to show what doesn't work sometimes. And this fabric, although it looks beautiful just as a palette with everything, isn't ideal because it has large areas that are darker and large that are lighter. So it gets, if you cut up a little square, let's say there's a 1-inch square, depending on how you cut it, it might look like it belongs to one side or the other. And we want to avoid that kind of ambiguity.
Another one, that if this were a smaller scale print and didn't have the white, this fabric would work. However, it's an example of it matches, but it's not the right scale for this particular project. So this was actually you can just bring them all out rather than one at a time. These are all in that middle range, and if the pattern were different and it lended itself to trying to blend light to dark, that would be better. But we need contrast. So it's
kind of the opposite of an ombre.
It's a little bit of the the Goldilocks and the Three Bears. It's a little too hot. It's a little too small.
So we're just avoiding those middle range so that there's
exactly.
You can see there's a clear separation of these. But what makes this palette so successful is they're all slightly muted. To me, they're just like, I want to wrap myself up in this quilt. This is so comfortable looking. And it is worth noting, though, that we have yarn dyes that are stripes in here. We have some Civil War reproductions, some 1930s, and actually some modern prints. So it's not the genre that matters so much. It's more about these are unified through the hue and they're all slightly desaturated and smaller scale.
So one of the things to think about as you're looking at the palettes that we've shown you is that they all have similar levels, within group 1, there's similar levels of value and hue. Like this one is a little bit more burgundy and this one is more kind of espresso, but generally they're similar in terms of, they're more similar than our palette, which is, kind of rainbow. But the differences between the fabrics are really small.
They're subtler.
But
subtle.
The differences between the fabrics are similar in group 1 and in group 2 in this example. However, another way to do it would be to have the fabrics in group 1, this is just an example, you can do it in reverse, be very similar. So these are all, that would be too light. These are all grays and blacks, but you could do group 2. This is an example of, this is our Warp and Weft 2 bundle. And this is our new, very limited edition. I know it's going to sell out immediately. Our Fresh Start bundle. So as you can see, these are all very different. The colors amongst the fabrics in the group are different in this.
Blues, greens, reds,
in group
oranges.
2. In group 1, they're very similar. So it isn't that you have to have all one monochromatic or all one, multicolored. You can split it. It will just be that the piecing in the units made with this group would be more subtle.
Much more subtle.
It would emphasize that.
What a lot of people would call low volume in terms of. And so this is where we worked really hard to design a quilt that will allow you to be successful within your color zone and your fabric happiness.
But also, we hear you when you say that you want to be able to use your stash.
Yeah.
And a lot of people want to, maybe their tastes have changed in terms of the way that they buy fabric, and they have a lot of yardage that they would like to give a new life to. And so this is a way for you to look at the stash that you have in a new way and be able to use it in a project.
And it's also for us, modern quilts scrappy quilts are generally thought of as more traditional. And we love modern scrappy, so that's what we're trying to provide here. Move.
So
another one.
Now we want to show you some fabrics that we love, but that are not going to work well for this project. And the first group, these are not in the group 1, group 2 order, but we just put them on the same piece of foam core so you can see them together. So these large scale prints, these, because of the units of the units you'll be cutting and sewing, and I'll show you some examples right here. So this is an example of one of the strips
in this first installment
that you're going to see in the installment. So you've got to think about how the fabric is going to cut up when it's this size. And if you have a pattern in a fabric like this, you can see, you know, if you have a 2-inch square or something, it might be white, you know, beige in one place. And we don't want you to be fussy cutting all these things, because that would be exhausting. But a lot of these are just, they're just a little bit too big for
And we love these fabrics.
We do.
We're just not using them for this quilt.
Exactly. The other category that I wouldn't use as much as we love them are these K Facet collection. Well, there's K Facet collection, there's some
Jane Sassaman
Jane
there.
Sassaman, and there's some Amy Butler in here as well. But as beautiful as this lily print is, if you cut it up into 2-inch pieces, you're just going to have different fabrics. So this is one where you would want to choose and the same thing for this cabbage print, that if you cut up a 2-inch piece here, it's going to look very different. You know, it's going to be a purple print here, but it's going to be a green print here. So
we're looking for kind of all fabrics that are a little more similar all over, and so
it doesn't. It's not going to. You're not going to have kind of like visual mushiness is what you want to be able to see. The patchwork that you're doing.
Even in the case of that black and gray palette that we showed, it would be subtle, but you would still see it.
Yeah.
Because the fabrics are different.
And that would be a design, an intentional design choice.
It actually would make it beautiful.
Yeah.
It would be beautiful.
It would be subtle, but different.
Yeah. Okay.
So I want to just show you some examples, just so you can see what you're going to be asked to be cutting and sewing in the first installment. So you're going to have 2 of these units. I have Bill wrote in the pattern to put chalk certain unit names on them, so you can see AKL1. I'm not spreading these out because it's not all going to fit.
No, but I just wanted to first show that these are, in this first installment, these are pairs of matching strips.
Exactly.
So you can begin to see right here how these are from group 1, which for us was dark, and these were from group 2, which is the lighter group. And when you put them all together, they make very distinctly different dark and light combinations.
And the same way here, that's a group 2 block, and this is a group 1 block.
Yeah.
And same thing with this unit. This is group 1 and this is group 2. Now, again, I know that this is challenging for some of you to put fabrics together in colors that you wouldn't normally combine, but you have to think about how the whole finished quilt is going to look. And as long as you like the fabrics and the colors in the palette, and spend some time on that, that's the reason that we're not going to give the second installment until January 13th. So we're giving you 2 weeks, a full 2 weeks.
After that, the installments will come a week apart.
Right. But that first one, we want you to be able to have time to, get additional fabric if you need it, to be able to think about it, but don't dive in cutting until you're really 100% happy with that palette.
Because once you're happy, you'll start sewing a variety of blocks and units.
Yeah. And then these are there's 2 squares that also are part of the first installment for cutting. So I think we've thrown a lot at you, but I hope that this is all going to be really useful to you. And be sure to join us if you're watching this before January 1st, Quilts First. Bring your questions then. We'll also answer questions at our February Quilts First, and that's on our Facebook group, our Facebook page, and we always upload them to YouTube after that
usually
that same
within
day.
the day.
Yeah, so you can watch either one, but if you have questions, and I'm seeing, I do monitor all of our Facebook platforms, or all of our social media platforms. If you do have questions about color or whatever, you can always add them in the group. And if I'm seeing a lot of people asking the same question, I might do a social media post to clarify it. But I really think we're going to have a lot of support for you.
And I think it's going to be so much fun. The mantra is going to be group 1, group 2.
Yeah,
and,
contrast.
Yes, contrast. And then I think it's such a wonderful chance to use the fabrics that you have, that you love, revisit ones you haven't used in a long time.
And use them in new ways.
Or if you're someone who's just looking for a shopping trip and wants to go and get a new palette altogether, you can absolutely do that for this quilt.
Yeah, but the more the merrier, I would say. If you're somebody who has a stash, this is a time to really break it out. And I'll tell you that, what we're doing as we are cutting our specific units is we have them, all of our group 1 and group 2 laid out. And after we choose 2 fabrics for a unit or a block or whatever, we just put them to the left side of the palette so we know what we've used. I also like I'm putting all of my blocks in a rigid box with a top, because some of the units that you'll be cutting, you won't be using until later. Yeah. So mark everything, keep everything
organization. If you've done a mystery quilt, you know that organization and storage are important, because you do have 6 installments.
And you don't want to cut up something that you're supposed to save.
There's a lot. There's a lot.
Yeah.
Which is the fun.
Now, again, this is, I think a beginner quilter who is adventurous could do this project.
Absolutely.
So this is, if you don't like to cut precisely, this is going to be challenging, because you really want.
Yeah, there are no teensy pieces with this.
No, little tiny pieces, but precision's going to matter.
Precision will make it successful. And I think it's definitely good for the adventurous beginner, or an expert quilter who's been doing this for years will probably also enjoy it, because it's a different approach.
Really
it's a very different kind of quilt.
Yeah.
And anytime there's any technical thing that we think that it might be slightly challenging for someone who's new, we'll make sure to have that in our video.
For sure.
To make it clear. Again, we want you to be successful. We want to see lots of beautiful quilts at the end of this. And
I posted this already yesterday, I think last night, in the Modern Quilt Studio Patterns and Fabrics page on Facebook. But new year, new blade. Oh. This is, yesterday, I was cutting fabric and I'm like, Bill, have you changed this blade recently? And I thought that's the perfect way to...
New year, new blade.
New year, new blade.
And new needle.
Yes, and new needle. That's another good one. So either sharpen your blades or get a new blade, start pulling those fabrics, and we will see you on social media and in the next video. Yeah. So
good
luck.
Welcome to Mystery.
Yeah.
Take care.